The cameras were rolling when Kezia Mensah sat down in the Family Feud contestant chair, smoothed her dress with both hands, and looked at the studio audience with the expression of a woman who has decided, specifically, deliberately, with full information, that she is going to be all right. She had been sitting with that decision for 8 months, not arriving at it. She had arrived at it on a specific Wednesday evening in October 2022 at approximately 9:17 p.m. while sitting at her kitchen table in Nashville, Tennessee, looking at a phone that was not hers. She had been sitting with the decision ever since, carrying it into work, into the school runs, into the dinners she cooked and the grocery lists she wrote, and the Thursday evenings she now spent alone, because Thursday evenings had been reserved, for 20 years, for her best friend Claudia. Claudia had been in the messages. The phone had been her husband Marcus's. He had left it on the kitchen counter charging while he went for a run, which was something he always did on Wednesday evenings at 9. Kezia had picked it up to check the time. The screen had lit up with a notification from a contact named C. She had not planned to look further. She had looked further. There were 2 years of messages. She had sat at that table for 3 hours. Marcus had come home from his run and found her there, and he had known, from the specific quality of the silence in that kitchen, that the thing he had been protecting was no longer protected. She had not screamed. She had not thrown anything. She had asked 3 questions, clearly, in order. She had listened to the answers. She had stood up, walked to the bedroom, and begun to think. Nobody in that studio knew that Kezia Mensah had sat at that kitchen table for 3 hours and made a decision that cost her the 2 most significant relationships of her adult life. Kezia and Claudia had been friends since they were 19, in the first week of their first year at Spelman. They had been in each other's weddings, Kezia in Claudia's, Claudia in Kezia's. They had sat together in labor and delivery waiting rooms, had flown across the country for each other's parents' funerals, had been the first phone calls in every version of crisis and joy that each of them had navigated across 2 decades. Kezia had 3 children. Claudia had 4. The children called each other cousins. The families had taken a vacation together every summer for 11 years. Kezia had been Claudia's maid of honor at a wedding in 2009. She had helped Claudia choose the dress. She had given the toast. She had said, in that toast, that the best thing about Claudia was that she made you feel, when you were with her, like the most important person in the room. She had said it as a compliment. She understood now that this quality was not selective. The divorce had been filed in December 2022. Marcus had moved out in January. He had been cooperative, in the way that guilty parties are sometimes cooperative, not generous, but careful, and without the dramatics that would have required Kezia to spend energy she was conserving for other things. She had served the paperwork on Claudia as well, a civil case for alienation of affection, which her attorney had suggested and which Kezia had agreed to not primarily for the money, but for the record. She wanted it on record. She wanted there to be a document that said, "This happened. This was real. These were the facts." She had not spoken to Claudia since October. She had told her children that Claudia and her family would not be spending time with them for a while. Her youngest, a 7-year-old named Zara, had asked why. Kezia had said, "Grown-up reasons." Zara had considered this and said, "Did she do something wrong?" Kezia had said, "Yes, baby." Zara had considered this further and said, "Is she still my Aunt Claudia?" Kezia had said, "That is a very good question. I'm still figuring that out." She was still figuring that out. She had applied to Family Feud because her sister Adesi had applied for both of them 2 years earlier, before any of this happened, and the taping date had arrived 6 months after everything had collapsed. She had almost canceled twice. Adaisi had said, "We are going. You are getting on that stage and you are going to be the version of yourself that survived this, not the version that is still sitting at the table." Kezia had said, "I'm not sure those are different versions." Adaisi had said, "Go anyway." She had gone. The team was Adaise, her friend from work Naomi, Naomi's sister Grace, and Kezia's cousin Dorcas, who had known Claudia for all 20 years and who had, upon hearing the full story, taken 3 days before she could speak without being purely angry. She had arrived at the studio furious on Kezia's behalf. And then, because she loved Kezia and Kezia had asked for one normal afternoon, had packed the fury away and replaced it with game show energy that was, if anything, more aggressive than fury. Steve Harvey introduced the team and asked Kezia what she did. She said, "Marketing director, healthcare sector, 11 years. He asked what the most important quality in marketing was. She said, "Knowing the difference between what something looks like and what it is." Steve tilted his head. He recognized the weight of that sentence arriving from somewhere specific. "That sounds like it came from experience," he said. "It came from October," she said. He waited. She told him about the phone on the counter and the notification and 2 years of messages and the best friend of 20 years. She told it with the particular control of a woman who has had 8 months to rehearse the shape of what happened and has made the choice to be honest about it publicly because she is done, she said, with being the person who protects everyone else's story by keeping hers quiet. She said, "I gave the toast at her wedding. I said she made you feel like the most important person in the room. I said it as a compliment." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey placed his cards on the podium. He stepped out from behind it entirely. "I need you to say that again," he said. She said it again, exactly the same way. 300 people stayed completely still. Steve turned away from the cameras. He pressed his handkerchief to his eyes. He stayed facing away for a long time. The crew had stopped. The competing family, the Jordan family from Memphis, were sitting with the specific stillness of people witnessing something they know is real. When Steve turned back, his eyes were wet, and he did not hide it. "I have to tell you something," he said. He walked forward slowly. "There was a time in my life, not at the lowest point, but in a hard season, when I understood that some people are in your life for your benefit, and some are in your life for theirs. And you cannot always tell the difference until the thing happens that reveals it." He stopped. "I also know what it is to lose 2 things at once, the marriage and the friendship. Because those are 2 separate griefs, and most people only acknowledge one of them. Your best friend of 20 years is not just an accessory to the marriage story. That is a primary grief. That is its own loss. And I don't want to stand here and let you talk about the marriage without naming the friendship as the loss that is equally real." Kezia looked at him. She had not cried at the table in October. She had not cried when she filed the paperwork. She had not cried in front of her children or her sister or her co-workers. She cried then, briefly, in the way that happens when someone names the thing you have been protecting accurately, and the protection becomes unnecessary because the naming is already done. "Stop everything," Steve said. He turned off stage. "We're stopping the game. This has never happened in the 45-year history of this show. Not for a woman who gave the toast at her best friend's wedding and meant every word of it." He walked Kezia to the front of the stage. He sat beside her. He said, "What does Zara need to understand about this? What do you want your daughter to know?" Kezia thought for a moment. She said, "I want her to know that you can love people fully and still protect yourself when they don't love you back the same way. I want her to know that the grief is real and the anger is allowed. And both of those things can be true while you are still a person who believes in friendship. I want her to know I did not stop believing in friendship. I stopped believing in that particular friendship. The studio came to its feet. Steve held up his hand. There was more. He pulled out his phone and called a trauma and betrayal counselor his foundation had worked with. Liv, speaker on, the whole room hearing. He explained the situation in 3 sentences. The counselor said, "Dual loss, marital betrayal, and friendship betrayal simultaneously is one of the most under-resourced grief categories in therapeutic practice." She said, "I would be honored to work with this family." Steve arranged 10 fully funded sessions and covered all costs through his foundation. He turned to the Jordan family, whose matriarch, a woman named Evelyn, crossed the stage without being asked and stood in front of Kezia and held both her hands and said, "You are going to be somebody's best friend again. The right somebody." Both families received the $25,000 prize. Steve Harvey looked at Kezia and at Zara's question and at the camera and said 5 words. She knew. She chose herself. When the episode aired 8 weeks later, the line about giving the toast became the most replayed moment of the episode. It reached 300 million views in 12 days. The hashtag #SheGaveTheToast trended in 24 countries. Therapists, marriage counselors, and friendship support communities shared it. A piece in a major psychology journal cited the specific dual grief phenomenon Steve named marital betrayal compounded by friendship loss as underdiagnosed and undertreated. 3 months after the taping, Kezia took Zara to a new city for the first time. Just the 2 of them, a long weekend, a hotel with a pool. On the last night, Zara asked, "Are you going to be okay, Mommy?" Kezia said yes. Zara said, "For real okay, or just saying okay?" Kezia said, "For real okay. Not today entirely, but I am moving toward it." Zara said, "Okay, that works." 6 months after the taping, Kezia received a letter from Claudia. She has not described its contents publicly. She has said only that she read it and did not respond, and that she has not decided whether to respond, and that not deciding is itself a decision she is allowed to make at her own pace. The civil case settled 9 months after the taping. A year after the taping, Kezia has a new Thursday evening. She goes to a women's dinner group, 6 women, rotating hosts, a different theme every week. She has hosted twice. She made her grandmother's jollof rice both times. Everyone called it the best thing they had eaten in recent memory. She said, "I'll teach you how to make it if you want." 3 of them said yes. The Zara Initiative, named for her daughter's question, is a betrayal recovery program established through Steve Harvey's foundation, providing dual grief counseling for individuals navigating simultaneous marital and friendship betrayal. In its first year, the program served more than 700 people. Its founding principle: both griefs are real. Both are named. Both deserve to be treated. Today, Kezia Mensah is the most important person in her own room. She says it is taking some practice. She also says it is the most important practice of her life. Have you ever stayed silent to protect someone else's story? Have you ever chosen yourself when it cost you 2 things at once? Share your story in the comments. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to know that both griefs are real and both deserve to be named. Ring that notification bell for more stories of people who chose themselves when everything was on the line.